So let's take a look in chapter 6 at how colors are perceived. We'll look at what color is, how do we detect colors. We're going to focus on trichromatic theory. And we will look also at opponent process theory. We will then take a look at what happens to make some individuals color deficient, what we popularly call colorblind. And then we'll look at how color constancy sort of compensates or helps deal with the effects of different types of lighting and the colors around a particular object also. So why do humans and other animals have color? If we see it, what's going on in this picture, we have the color picture on the left and the black and white on the right. And boy, aren't those red berries really much more noticeable in the color picture? In addition, we can tell that they're ripe, as opposed to if they were, a different color, indicating that they weren't ripe. And so it's really helpful to see color because it increases the contrast between objects and it provides important information about the food we might eat as well as other things. Light travels through the air in waves, and the length of the wave is an important factor in determining the color that we perceive. So the wavelength is not the color, nor does it actually give it the color, but our visual system assigns a particular color to light of different wavelengths. And so the shorter wavelengths we see as violet or blue, medium wavelengths we see as green, and then the longer wavelengths we see as orange and red. And we can see here that wavelengths, again, are just one small set of electromagnetic energy that we can see. Other forms of electromagnetic energy we do not see visually, but they are still around us. We just, our eyes, our rods and cones do not see them. So let's take a look at trichromatic theory of color vision, and it was developed by Young and expanded upon by von Helmholtz. And it deals with the three cone systems in our eyes, but they were working at a time when they could not look at the retina and see the cones within the retina, the individual cells, because they didn't have the technology. So they inferred that there were three different types of receptors for color, so that we have this need for three colors as a minimum out of which we can perceive all the colors in the rainbow. And so let's start off by looking at additive color mixture. That is what we experience when we're watching television or looking at a computer screen. And so the screen has these little light emitting diodes, for example, and we have the red, green, and blue, right? And we can see these are pure out here on the edge, but then look what happens in the very middle. Where the three colors combine, we get white. So when all wavelengths of light are present, we get white. When there's only short wavelengths, we perceive blue. When there's only medium wavelengths, we perceive green. And when there's only long wavelengths, we perceive red. But if there's a combination of equal amounts of short, medium, and long wavelengths, and they combine, we perceive that as white. And so here you can see a nice little list of the different colors that are perceived in a person with normal color vision, depending on the wavelength of the light. So short, medium, and long, blue, green, and red. And then we have here some of these that are combinations: yellow, orange, purple, and then of course white, an equal mix of all three. So let's take a look at what happens if we add just blue and yellow. So if we turn on a blue light, that means we're adding short wavelengths, right? Now, on top of that blue, we add yellow light. If we turn on a yellow light, the yellow light will consist of long and medium wavelengths. So with both blue light and a yellow light on, what color would we perceive? We would perceive white. Now here's a demonstration using actual lights. So there's blue, green, and red. And you can see how when we get all three lights on, the surface appears white. So we've been talking about colored lights, like what we experience when we watch television. And that is an example of something called additive color mixture. It's additive because each color of light adds more wavelengths. And once you have all the different wavelengths, short, medium, and long, then we experience white, or if it's not very bright, we would experience the color gray. In addition, superimposing blue light and yellow light leads to white because together they convey short, medium, and long wavelengths. But paint works differently. Paint works through what's called subtractive color mixture. Here, each paint color leads to the absorption of more wavelengths so that fewer wavelengths reflect off the surface of the object. So paint is a substance that in a sense captures wavelengths of light and doesn't let them reflect off. And that is why mixing blue and yellow paint leads to the color green. When you add blue paint, it will absorb long wavelengths and reflect short and medium wavelengths, as we see here on the left. It's absorbing the long. They are no longer, they're not able to reflect off of the surface anymore because of the addition of the paint. But the paint is allowing medium and short wavelengths to reflect off and enter our eyes. When we add yellow paint, yellow absorbs short wavelengths, allowing only medium and long to reflect off. So if we mix these two paints, the only wavelength of paint that is allowed to reflect are the medium wavelengths. Now let's take a look at this really good demonstration at how the cones create a unique pattern of activity, a unique neural code for every color in the rainbow, assuming you have 3 functioning cones. Now your book talked about other species like cats and dogs that only have 2 cones for color, and that means that they don't see the same range of colors that we do. And it also talked about an individual who was tested who had 4 functioning cones and was able to distinguish between colors that the rest of us would not be able to perceive as different from each other. Now let's start off with the shortest wavelength. So we're here at 335, which is basically like an indigo color, almost like a violet. And we can see that it's activating the short wavelength cone at maximum and producing just a tiny bit of activation here in the middle wavelength cone and absolutely no activation in the long wavelength cone. Why? Let's take a look here. Now this line shows where we are on this range of wavelengths. So we're at the very, very far, left on the shortest wavelengths, and we can see we're getting activation here of the short cone, little tiny bit of the medium, and absolutely none of the long. As I move the wavelength closer to what a real blue is, basically let's put this here at 400, we can see we're getting maximum activation of short and very little of medium and long. And I'm going to keep moving this to the right, and as I do that, we're going to get unique activation of the 3 cones at every different point along this range. So we're still in blue, short 440, 450. Now we get here at 466, we start seeing that the medium wavelength cone is more active than the short. And that pattern is going to continue. So these would be colors that would generally be sort of greenish. We're starting to get into yellows now. And as we transition into yellow, we see that there's absolutely no activity in the short but now there's more activity of the long wavelength than of the middle wavelength cones, and that's going to continue as we go into orange and then ultimately reds. And we'll end our discussion of trichromatic theory by considering how other species might perceive different colors. Your book does a nice job of describing this, but I wanted to show you an example comparing human vision with that of the honeybee. So you can see that the honeybee doesn't quite see the very longest wavelengths that humans can see, but instead they are able to see much shorter wavelengths than humans. And so they can see out into what we would consider ultraviolet. And as a result of that, look at the flower here on the right. That's how a honeybee would see it. And the one here on the left, that's how we see it. A person with normal color vision with 3 different types of cones would see it this way.